I'd like to introduce Margaret Wheatley, who is our keynote speaker and will be doing the morning session for us. And you know, I struggled a couple nights ago wondering where to start my introduction to Margaret Wheatley, because I've read her books and I've read some articles and been on her website for the Burkana Institute, and there's just so much. And she seemed to have accomplished so much, and I didn't know what to highlight, or I hadn't met her in person. And when it's harder to introduce somebody you haven't met. So yesterday afternoon I went to the airport and picked her up and fell into just an easy, quick, casual conversation in the car, and just had the reminder as I was driving her to her dinner engagement that those are those connections you make, and it's all about relationship. And even if it's relationships can be formed in that short of a time, that you can meet somebody and feel a connection, and that is what really her work is all about, promoting. And I just thought I would share that, because I thought that opened the door to writing this introduction. So in an article that I read of Meg's, she states that media ads and slogans are wrong. The world doesn't change one person at a time. That it changes as networks of relationships form among people who discover that they share a common cause and a vision of what's possible. Local networks form, they merge with other local efforts, becoming organic in their own being, and then intentions are set free to work. And that's the work we're doing, is imagining and setting intentions and developing the possibilities that we have seen through our conversations. Meg started her work as a Peace Corps member. We have a lot of people who start this work as AmeriCorps volunteers, or as volunteers in this classroom or in their child's preschool. It's a great place to start. Volunteer work is very powerful and really gives you a contribution to your community or to your world. I can imagine you were very idealistic, or I'm sure that you were hopeful about making a difference, and I think that you have made a difference when I read about the work that you've done, and I hope that you can help us move forward in some good conversations about our state and the work that we're doing. So I think that is kind of the bulk of what I want to say in the way of an introduction. We're all on our way. There's lots more to learn, and I think that we are here and ready to be students today. Meg has her master's in media ecology from New York University and her doctorate in organizational behavior and change from Harvard University. I was talking to my husband last night about writing this, and he says, maybe she can help you get your office cleaned. He always tells me vertical is a file and horizontal is a pile. So I thought organizational behavior was good. So please join me in welcoming Meg. So.
So how are you all? I just wanted to begin not by speaking, but by sharing a music video with you. I'll probably show you several clips from this. This is a wonderful project, and it's a wonderful example of how big projects start. A man who is a musician, whose name I never remember, but that's him, and I really admire his talent. He heard the street musician playing, who you'll see in a moment, and he got the idea somehow of, why don't we go around the world and record musicians, street musicians everywhere, playing the same song? And so for 4 years, they traveled the world. They recorded over 100 different musicians, and they've produced this beautiful DVD and CD, and now they're even appearing on television, and started a foundation to bring music to economically poor communities in different places around the world so that kids can share the joy of creating. And it's also the theme of this song that I thought would be a great way to get our spirits enlivened this morning. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight.
Come
on.
You go in your life, at some point you're going to need somebody to stand by you. Oh yeah, oh my darling, stand by me. No matter who you are, no matter where you go in life, you gon' need somebody to stand by you. No matter how much money you got, all the friends you got, you gon' need somebody to stand by you. When the night has come and the land is dark and that moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't shed one tear, just as long as your people come and stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Come on, stand by me. Yeah. Oh, when that sky that we look upon, when she tumble and fall on the mountains, they should crumble into the sea. I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Please stand by me. Stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Please stand by me. Stand by me. Oh, baby, baby. So darling, darling, stand. Oh, stand. Oh, stand. Stand by me. Come on, stand by me. Stand. Oh, won't you stand? Oh, stand. Stand by. Come on, stand by me. When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. I won't be afraid. I won't be afraid. Not as long as you, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So this is the group Playing for Change. You can go to their website, and a lot of these videos have been on YouTube, but the whole DVD is just, for me, a joyous experience, and I'll probably play another one later. But for me, this is really the theme that I want to talk about, which is how do we stand by each other at this time? There's a lyric in this song that really impressed me. I've had this song going through my head constantly for weeks now. And the lyric is that if the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall and the mountains should crumble in the sea, I won't shed a tear. No, I won't care at all as long as you stand by me. And for me, the realization that we all need to come to is that people are capable of getting through anything. And I mean anything. I mean war and starvation and great natural disasters. We're really capable of getting through anything as long as we know that we have to do it together. And one of the great dilemmas of living in America is that we're so focused on individualism and competition and thinking that this terrible notion of social Darwinism, which is if you're a good person, you'll make it. And if you haven't made it, it shows that you're somehow inferior. This has been deep in the American political psyche for many, many years. It's not in President Obama's psyche, thank God, but it's still out there. So one of the tasks that we have is to realize the power of being together and how we might really start to pay attention to our relationships so that we don't get fragmented, we don't get dispersed, we don't get lost as we go through this very difficult time. So that's going to be sort of the general theme of what I want to say, and then we'll have a lot of time to talk with each other, to really see what we're each thinking, and to hopefully, through this process of conversation, create more solidarity amongst us, or more understanding that we truly are all in the same boat. Okay? So I'm going to talk for maybe 40 minutes or so, probably play another song, and then we're going to move into this wonderful process called World Cafe, in which it's possible to have very meaningful, intimate conversations among a large group of people. So it's a very good process, and I will comment more on the process itself when we get to it. But I want to start with the big picture. So here's a slide. What on earth is going on? It's an image of vast destruction from the Gulf Coast of Texas after Hurricane Ike. Hurricane Ike hit Texas on September 13th. It's the third largest hurricane to ever hit America. It affected 13 million people, but it had the case of bad timing because it made landfall and created this terrible destruction just as Wall Street was collapsing. It's exactly the same timing. I was already working down there in Houston with the people who'd done such extraordinary assistance for Hurricane Katrina and all the people from New Orleans who came to Houston. And Houston took in 150 to 200,000 people from New Orleans quickly, I mean, within 24 hours, and treated all of them. Those of you who are, I think this, you will relate to this, they offered case management and truly professional standards of care to 150,000 displaced people. And they did it in record time and with such a high standard of professionalism and love. That was one of their great achievements. So when Hurricane Ike came, they thought, well, we know how to do hurricanes, you know? But they didn't realize that Hurricane Ike was their hurricane, you know? It wasn't over in New Orleans and they were just dealing with people who'd lost everything. They now were dealing with the fact that they were losing everything. But I remember in that week when I was watching the financial world collapse, but also on the phone to my friends in Houston saying, do you have any idea what's going on Wall Street? And they went, no. You know, I mean, my friend said, I'm just lying on my kitchen floor trying to catch my breath before I go out and try and move some of the tree branches that are blocking my entryway. So have you heard of Hurricane Ike? Sort of? Yeah. Amazing levels of devastation. But that's just, I just feel a need to bring it to more and more of our attention. Still struggling, still going a big battle with FEMA and other federal agencies down there. My friend who runs this very large social service agency, Neighborhood Centers, Inc., keeps struggling with FEMA, and as she said, you know, FEMA is still capable of random acts of stupidity. So you could probably describe a number of agencies that way, right? But I use the photo here not really to talk so much about Ike, but to talk about the bigger picture. What's going on right now in the United States? What's going on in the world? This is a time when there seems to be so much destruction of dreams, of futures, of a sense that, you know, we're going to have decent lives even. So during this time of economic collapse, I think it's important to notice that this is not just an economic problem. It actually is not a financial crisis, but it's a crisis created around the world by the fact that we organized on economic values. Now, you must see this all the time in your work, right? You have to make decisions based on money, not about quality of care. Or you have to make decisions based not on social values or values of family or what's best for children, but simply on values on what can be afforded. What is there money for? And at this time when we have less and less money and our budgets continue to be cut, it's really important to notice that the big change that has to happen is not how we get more money, but how we find other resources. And for me, that's why I'm going to speak so much today about community, because community for me is the ultimate resource. How we work together, how we make things happen even when we don't have the money. But we live in a world, one of the ways of describing how warped, how out of kilter our values are. I listened to a woman who's head of the World Food Organization recently. She said there are now 1 billion people on this planet who are going hungry. 1 billion people. And some of that is because poverty has increased around the world because the developed countries aren't giving money. The United Nations doesn't have money to give. And she pointed out that for all the trillions of dollars that have been spent on rescuing financial firms, it's probably between $4 and $7 trillion now worldwide that's been, governments have put into the holding on, maintaining the financial system. She said, if we had 0.1% of that money, we could feed the poor. I mean, right there you just see it. 0.1% of what we've spent. So the reason I say this to you is not to depress you. It is very depressing. But to understand that the work that we need to do is in part about not letting economic values and dollar values stop us from doing the work. And realizing that you and the work that you do are the keepers of much more sustainable values about family and children and health and community. But it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle. So here's my favorite quote to describe this time by a wonderful economics and sort of futurist commentator. Never in the history of the world have we faced so much complexity combined with so much incompetence in understanding its properties. We've created these monster delivery systems for social services. We've created an institutionalization of care. We've created a healthcare system that does not provide health, an education system that does not create learning environments. If you look at any major system that you have to deal with, it's very complex, and we have no understanding of really how to make it work. Okay, so have I depressed you enough? Maybe I should play another song. So here's a photo that, for me, when it appeared, I thought, wow, this is a perfect image for our time, as we're all living in these institutions and systems that are failing. Here are people who actually survived because they helped one another. I remember reading the report of one of the men, one of the businessmen. He said, of course you want to get out of there. You know, you want to get off this plane, but then you notice there's a woman with 2 children, and you want her to get out. You know, so just that quick conversion to thinking about others rather than self. But this is a common phrase that we've certainly heard President Obama say it over and over again, that we're all in this together. This is what I think is a big question. Are we really willing to learn what this means? What's going on right now in healthcare with all these ridiculous town hall meetings where people are just violent and aggressive, this is not about we're all in this together. The second quote that's circulating a lot is we're all in the same boat. And the question is, do we really feel this right now? I do think this is the work, but I myself am just watching this healthcare craziness to see if we're really going to come together again, or if we're just going to let our aggression and fracture our relationships and we'll end up with nothing. And it's for me right now, it's really unknown which way it's going to go. But so this is what I've just drawn, I hope, is a very quick portrait of where we are now. What I'd like to do next, or well, let me take a moment and say, so what's going on inside of you right now as I've gone through the bigger picture stuff? Yes?
What you just said reminds me of another description of a box with different compartments where we put things.
Okay, well,
Together in a way.
something that looks like that? Yeah. I didn't set her up, I promise. But you just keep with me here. Yes. Any other comments or yes?
Well, it's kind of like an intersection. You know, we have one out here, just in the paper out south of this town, that actually a young woman was killed. And yet the people that are in the area have talked to the governmental people to do something about it. And even with this young girl that has been killed, they haven't done nothing.
Yeah.
So, you know, it takes what you people are doing here to get something done, because you're right on the money.
Okay. Any other comments or things you're feeling from the big picture overview?
We know there's a problem, but what do we do? How do we fix it?
Okay. But for me, it's really important to define what's the problem. So to say that, you know, the government isn't paying attention to what it should is one thing. That's one definition of the problem, but another definition of the problem is we're working with the wrong values. And another definition of the problem is that we are the ones who are either going to make a difference or not, but we're not going to do it with support from the larger society. I will talk more about this, but how we define the problem actually is critically important, because then we decide what to do. So my definition of the problem is that we need to come together as a community. We need to realize we're not going to get help, that we are swimming upstream with our desire to support families and children and create healthy communities. And once we realize that we're swimming against the common culture or the common tide, then it places for me even more importance on our relationships. So this is how I am defining the problem. Here is how we want the world to look, and basically keep constructing programs. You know, when you look at this, what comes to mind for you? People in boxes was limitations. What do you mean by that?
Well, we have defined goals, we have defined responsibilities, and that tends to.
So everything's defined, pre-planned, yeah, really well organized, yeah. What else comes to mind? Yes?
Hierarchy that presupposes that there's someone who's superior and someone who's inferior within the system.
Right, right. There are definitely people who are better than others, and they show up at the top of the chart, yes.
And then there are people who don't know where to put me.
And people who don't know, because you don't fit in a box. Right, right. But usually when we don't know where to put people, we do put them in a box anyway, and we completely destroy their capacity. There's a wonderful bit of a poem by an American poet who said, don't describe the boundaries first, the squares and the boxes and the triangles of preconceived possibility, and then pour life into them, trimming off leftover edges and ending potential. And every time we label someone, that's exactly what we do. We put them in a box, we limit their possibility, and we trim off. We don't even notice that we're trimming off the leftover bits and pieces of the person. How many more syndromes are there to identify childhood problems in schools, right? How many more categories of people do we have that are supposed to give you information about them, but that in fact just limit your perception of them? And I'm going to show you how this works in a moment. But some of the assumptions about people that are in hierarchy, in this hierarchical model, one certainly is that the good people become the leaders and the other people aren't nearly as good and should just obey them, right? Does that feel familiar to you? You should just do what you're told. If you're a, quote, lower level employee, it actually means you are a lower level person. Yes? And you're not working as hard, and if we didn't tell you what to do, you wouldn't do anything at all, right? You're just a slacker. So this has a lot of assumptions about human beings' capacity that are very, very negative. Now, here is a quote that has a lot of meaning to me. We'll see if it has to you. But when an old culture is dying, as I do believe ours is, the new culture is born from a few people who are not afraid to feel insecure. How comfortable are you personally with going against the tide, with doing what you know is right, even though you won't get approval for it, or that you'll even get criticized for it? How often do you take risks, or do you try and lay low? That's for me what some of this quote means about that if we're really giving birth to the kinds and quality of service that needs to happen, because you know people a lot better than any government agency knows people, then how often do you come up against this fact that nobody appreciates you? Nobody understands you. No one's praising you, even though you just did something really good. So that's what insecurity for me means, and it's different for each of us. Some of us feel, well, excuse my language, but to hell with it, I'm just going to do what I know needs to get done. And others of us go, oh, I'm really afraid I'm going to lose my job. So this is just something to examine in yourselves. But now I want to talk about community. And I want to talk about what an untapped resource community is. This quote of mine comes from many years of working with communities in truly devastated environments. I mean, I've mentioned Katrina and Ike, but I've also worked in a number of African communities, and my institute has worked in South America and India, and I've worked with a number of different Aboriginal people around the world. And what they have taught me is this: there is simply no greater power for change than when a community gets together and realizes that it has common cause, that it really wants to create something. Now, this is what President Obama is hoping we will step up to, that will be involved in creating healthy communities, because that's the way we get through. Now, the other insight that I've had from working in places that have no material resources whatsoever is that I've seen and met and watched people who realize nobody else is going to help us. It's up to us. And so many of us, especially when you're working within a formal structure and you're used to a budget and getting money and writing grants and getting money, it becomes a kind of paralysis where we're still waiting for somebody else to give us the resources to do the work we know needs to get done. And the reason I call that a paralysis is because the people that I've watched take on things themselves realize nobody else is going to help us ever. So they just give up hoping for outside help or funding, and they just make do with what they have. But in discovering what they have, they find this very untapped, rich resource of each other. So when we work with community, here's where I just want to back up to the biggest picture I can possibly offer, which is how the universe works. This is a picture of two, star clouds colliding from the Hubble telescope. Life's basic building blocks are relationships. In the world of physics, in quantum physics, when scientists try and discover what's at the base of everything, and they use this image, okay, so there must be some basic building blocks here. And instead what they've discovered for over 100 years now is that the universe is all about relationships. There is no such thing as an isolated individual, even at the most elementary level. You can't see anything in this universe unless it's in relationship with something else. And I want to explain this at the human level, but before then, these are a photo of Utah aspen trees where I live. How many trees are in the photo? 1, yes. You know about aspen trees. Aspen trees propagate by sending out roots. So we're looking at probably just 1 tree if we could see underground. Now, think about your own spiritual tradition, whatever it is. And is there a teaching there about how we're all one? Either we're all interconnected, or we're all one in Christ, or we're all one in the sight of God. So I've looked at a lot of spiritual traditions, and they all talk about oneness. Indigenous people know this. They've never forgotten that we're part of the web of life. There's another thing about aspen trees, though, that I recently learned, which is when they travel underground. So they started in Minnesota, and when the last glacier came down 10,000 years or so ago, like most Midwesterners, they tried to find a better climate, and they headed west, and they ended up Colorado, Utah. You have them in Montana, right? Yes? No? Yeah. They're known as a pioneering species because they appear first, but they appear by traveling underground. And I've been told that to this day, farmers in Nebraska dig up aspen roots, their journey. And I think if we think of ourselves as pioneers, there's some good advice here, which is you got to travel underground. You know, don't put your head up too soon. This below the radar position is a great place, even though you don't get any praise for it. But the basic principle here that we're getting from the science is that this whole idea that people or anything exists alone is something we made up. And it's something we made up in Western culture. This does not exist worldwide. And our traditional peoples, our Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples never forgot this. In fact, one way of thinking is they've held this wisdom for us, and now it's time to really start to work with it. Nothing living lives alone. Nothing. And if you've done any work in family systems theory, you've learned this, right? You can't understand a child's behavior without looking at the whole system of other members of the family and economic circumstances and life events. So it's not only that nothing lives alone, it's that we never know who we are until we're in relationship. So just look at this photo. This is the kind of, oh, how cute photo. You can't, I don't know why we're not getting a full screen here, but that's a dove, obviously, and the dove adopted this little monkey. Can you work on getting this to fit better? Okay, I know how to do that. The quote, though, is from a quantum physicist. We are all bundles of potential that manifest only in relationship. I'll do it in a little while. I do know how to do that. Thank you. We are all bundles of potential that manifest only in relationship. What this means is that each time you meet someone new, some new quality in yourself becomes evident, right? Some people you meet, you instantly like them, and you're friendly, and you're outgoing, and you're a good person, and then someone else walks by and you can't stand them instantly, brings out all your worst qualities. Now this works the other way. How we perceive other people actually predicts who they will become. So if you predict that a child, this is the research that is unendingly available in education, that what a teacher thinks about a child's capacity becomes that child's capacity. And so when I talked earlier about how we put us in boxes or label us as a syndrome or a particular problem, we really need to understand that every time we work with a label for a person or a child or a family, every time we work with a label, we are cutting off all that potential. We're just saying, this is who you are. I know who you are. I understand who you are. And then we lose. That's why I love that poem. You know, we trim off the edges of all the rest of that person by putting them in a little box. And the box is called a label these days. Does this make sense to you? How we perceive a person really predicts, in large measure, what we will see from that person. And this is a really important thing to notice for those of you who are dealing day to day with other human beings. Now, here's a principle from biology that I think is fundamentally important. If a system isn't working, then the way to repair that system is to create more connection. Now, we know this is true with individuals, right? If the person is in distress, you hopefully try and create a better relationship with them. If a community is in distress, not functioning well, not caring about some of its members, then the solution is to create more connections. So I was just remembering a story I heard in Australia recently. It was a social service agency that told a woman from there who told me the story. There was a woman who was quite elderly whose husband had died. And she was very, very depressed, and she wasn't coming out of it. She basically just wanted to die. And she was visited by a young social service worker who didn't have a lot of skills and experience. So the premise was that if she'd been visited by a sophisticated, experienced social service worker, the person would have come to her home and said, well, here are all these programs I can offer you, right? Or you could come down to the town hall where we play bingo on Tuesday, or you could come out to this cooking club on Friday, or she would have just addressed the woman's despair with a program. Because once you know that all these programs exist and they're quite good, you just want to try and offer them. But instead, there was this young woman who really didn't know a lot. And so she just sat there and listened to the woman. And as she was listening to her, and not trying to fix her, but just listening, she noticed there were these beautiful crocheted tea cozies, the covers that you put on teapots to keep the tea warm. Very popular in Britain and Australia and other English colonies. And these were really pretty and very intricate. And she asked the woman, she said, where did these come from? And the woman said, oh, I make them, you know. And so the young social worker said, well, there's this new very fancy tea place, shop that has opened. What if I take some of these down there and then we'll see if they like them. Maybe they'll sell them. Well, these became a huge item. People really wanted to buy these beautiful tea cozies. So the despairing older woman couldn't produce enough of them, so she gathered together other women in her community who were also alone and had nothing to do, and they formed this club to make tea cozies. Well, they're making them and they're selling them, and they're making money, and they don't need the money. So that, right? So then she said, because in Australia they actually take care of their elderly people. They said, well, we don't need this money. So the social worker said, well, you know, there's another group of women who are cancer survivors who could really use the money. And so they started giving their money to this other group of women. And little by little, this whole very robust community of very caring, active women emerged. And this woman, the original tea cozy maker, ended up speaking at a national conference, you know, completely transformed by the experience of finding something meaningful to do and then being able to even give the money from that to other women in need. And it's, for me, a beautiful story of someone walking in. That first conversation was about discovering who this woman was, past her depression, past the kind of quick diagnosis we would give. And out of that, so much potential blossomed. And it was about creating connections. This is where the health is found. Now, the word health has this recipe in its history. The word health comes from an Old English word for wholeness. And the word for wholeness comes from holiness. So for me, it's just so clear that if we want to create health, we have to create wholeness. And in the process of creating stronger connections of wholeness, we are also then touching into the human spirit and into holiness. You know, my favorite scripture from the Bible is, whenever two or more are gathered, there will I be also. And I think we really need to take that seriously. I've mentioned a few times that I find traditional peoples and indigenous peoples have never forgotten that we're all in this together. This is from South Africa. It's Zulu children. The letter that's missing is a U. The word is Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is a concept that pervades traditional cultures, most of them. What it means, it has many translations. This is one, that we can be human only together, that there's no such thing as an individual, that nobody lives alone. Nobody gets through life without other people. But other definitions of this word Ubuntu are that a person is only a person through other people. Like you only know who you are through your relationships. And another definition is, I exist through you, and you exist through we. I have found that this concept is easily available in many, many cultures, but not in the United States. What do you mean, I exist through you? No, I exist because I work hard and I struggle and I'm smart and I make it on my own. That's the great American mythos. The reason I am talking both science and history and religion is because I feel it's so important for us to realize that when we're striving to create community and work with one another in very new kinds of relationships, that what we're actually doing is just getting out of this very paralyzing prison we're in about Western society, which says you make it on your own. And that we've got the whole universe working with us, because the whole universe, and I don't mean to sound grandiose, but if you read the science, you can't escape this. The whole universe comes into form based on relationships. And we live in a culture that says relationships are soft. They're that soft kumbaya stuff, right? Or it's that group hug stuff. In England, they call relational things ooey wooey or fuzzy, soft and fuzzy. And then just recently in Australia, I was given this wonderful phrase. They call it hippie shit. These gorgeous women are from Senegal, West Africa, and they have taught me something that still startles me. Senegal is a West African country, has the usual problems, you know, illiteracy. They also have over-literacy. They have 100,000 people with graduate degrees and no work for them, and that's an increasing problem in this country. They have the worst pollution I've ever been in. Really, it was unbearable. You just, like, at night, your shower would run black with all the soot that was on your skin and in your hair. So they have all these problems, but they do not have suicide, which I still find just something that stops my mind. Because suicide, as you know better than I, and have probably experienced more times than I, is a pandemic right now. It's the second leading cause of death among adolescents. It's a worldwide problem in the developed world, where younger and younger people are just choosing to leave. And so to discover a culture where people do not take their own lives, for me, was really shocking. And I asked them, I said, how's this possible? I thought it was just part of the human condition. And they just said, well, we have each other. Nobody goes hungry. Nobody's homeless. We are always there for each other. And I recently met 2 Western women, both of whom had spent time in Senegal. And one said when she became really ill with amoebic dysentery, people just kept coming to her home and sitting there with her. They didn't want her to be alone. They wanted to extend their love and care. And so her home was constantly filled with people. And another woman said that whenever she was getting ready to go anywhere in Senegal, this is true in Africa, throughout Africa, she said, I never knew how long it would take me to get there because it depended on who I would meet on the way. Now, very recently, a colleague of mine who works with a Northwest Native American tribe told of his work there at a time when there was an absolute rash of teen suicides. I think they'd had nearly a dozen kids kill themselves. And it's a growing problem among indigenous peoples everywhere in the world right now. And there was a young man who was standing on a bridge and he was getting ready to throw himself off the bridge. He said, my friend said he didn't even notice that the river he was going to kill himself in was called the River of Life. But he was standing on the bridge and a car went by and somebody in the car just waved to him. That's all they did. They just waved. And that stopped him. And then his story actually ended suicide there. I mean, people got that the issue was, do people feel they belong? Do we feel we're in relationship? What's the strength of our connection? And there's more and more work being done that I'm aware of it among indigenous peoples about just starting to address suicide not as the problem, but the problem is disconnection. The problem is people don't feel they belong. So that's why community, again, is for me the saving grace, is what we really have to start paying attention to. Any of you have any stories in this regard or incidents that come to mind about the power of community? We're going to have time to talk about that in the World Cafe, but I'm just curious if there are any stories in the whole group. In your own work with families and kids, have you discovered this power of community? Yes?
I think sometimes I find with disability that families, with the best of intentions, that person's family can really limit them because they're protecting them from failing or protecting them from disappointment. And sometimes, even though that family is there for all the other needs, you have to go outside that family and find another community that takes off that label and opens that box of opportunity.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
It's a personal story, but 5 years ago, I experienced a huge loss in my life. And at that time, I was very aware that I had community, sort of. But when I experienced that loss, my family and friends rallied around me, and they came to my house. They weren't there every day.
Yeah.
But they were there, and what I said to my friends, that during that summer, I will be okay because I live alone. If I know someone is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened over that year is there was always someone. So
Always someone
there
here.
was always someone, and so they were there whether we were there physically or not. And I
of the places where I really learn about community is from observing what goes on in a time of a natural disaster. So this is a painting by a friend from one of the images from Hurricane Katrina of a woman trying to save her children. What I see in times of natural disasters is that we really see the best of the human spirit. We see what we're capable of, and we see what's usually hidden by bureaucracy, by rules and regulations. So I just want to bring this to our attention. So one of the things we always see in the news is that bureaucracies can't respond in time. Those are the random acts of stupidity and the ongoing acts of not being able to get out from under the regulations and the bureaucracy fast enough. But in contrast to agencies and governments not being able to get it together quickly, well, here's a really powerful example of it, which is, these are all school buses that were flooded by the levee breaking in New Orleans. These buses could have been used to evacuate people. And even when they weren't used to evacuate people before the storm hit, they should have been moved to higher ground. I mean, you never leave your equipment where it's capable of being flooded. And when asked why these buses weren't used, we got a real bureaucratic response, which was, well, you know, they weren't up to snuff, or we didn't have enough licensed drivers, or this, you know, all that BS. And so people died. 1,600 people died in Katrina, by the way. And the suicide rate still continues to go up there. And the obituary pages have tripled in the number of people who are dying just from the loss of everything, including their culture, which was the biggest loss, I think. So the first, I just learned this, the first school bus used to evacuate people was driven by an 18-year-old kid. He was standing by the bus, there were all these people, and a policeman came up to him and said, "Do you have a license?" And the kid said, "Yeah." And he said, "Drive these people to Houston. Get on the bus and drive them to Houston." Now, Houston is 6.5 hours away. This kid did not have a bus driver's license. And he said the whole time he was driving them, he was terrified that at the other end he was going to be arrested, right? But instead he became sort of a hero. But if that policeman hadn't said, "Just get these people out of here," you know, nothing would have happened. But we also have this great capacity of people, which is that when there is a tragedy, and you know this from your own experience, I'm sure, neighbors and people you never met, strangers, rush in. It's a big disaster. We get people coming from all over the world to help, or we go to other parts of the world to help. This slide is of the Cajun Navy. People who could find a boat got in it, and the first thing they did was to offer their services to the Coast Guard and the police. And of course they were told, "Well, no, your boat doesn't meet regulation." Seriously. But what they did as a just completely independent, self-organized group is they transported people, pets, corpses, and medicine. And they played a key role in assisting there. So we have this capacity, and I think what I see, especially in these natural disasters, is that we see people's generosity and caring and desire to help. This is, for me, the essence of being human. We have these very good traits that we seem to be really skilled at destroying or ignoring as we get into more and more bureaucracy. This is a picture from West Virginia. West Virginia, which is one of our poorest states, the governor of West Virginia was sitting next to the governor of Louisiana when the word came in about Katrina. And of course, you know, it wasn't Katrina that caused the problems. It was the levees breaking, so it was a man-made problem. And the governor of the poorest state went home and said to everyone in his state, we need to help our brothers and sisters. So they sent 3 Army planes down there to bring up people. 2 of them arrived, and the 3rd, the government officials wouldn't let leave the ground. For God knows what reason, but anyway. But here you have, again, this just outpouring of compassion for strangers who we recognize are our brothers and sisters. And we see the human spirit in hardship, in times of war. I just recently took this photo at the in Washington, D.C. at the new World War II memorial. This is about the Battle of Midway. They had no right to win, yet they did, and in doing so, they changed the course of a war. And this is what I love. Even against the greatest of odds, there is something in the human spirit, a magic blend of skill, faith, and valor that can lift men from certain defeat to incredible victory. I think we need to reconnect with the skill, faith, and valor that is in our communities, is in the people that you are serving right now. And it's so easily forgotten in the day-to-day. This is Dr. Mohammed Yunus. He's the founder of microlending, which I hope you know about, maybe even received. But microcredit has changed the lives of the poor in many places around the world. It went from his first idea to now there being over 100 million people who've received microcredit. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 for this. I love his I adore this man. I think he's an actual living saint among us. He's from Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world, using microcredit and discovering that they need to give the money to women, not to men. I mean, the worldwide statistic now is that if you fund women, 60% of what you give them is returned to the community. And it's half that if you fund men. Only 30% comes back to the community. This is the growing story out there that women are the ones who, when given even the slightest economic means, you see that their children go to school, their children's health improves, the buildings of the community start being cared for, and the whole level of the community healthiness rises. And so Grameen Bank, Dr. Yunus's little organization, started by giving loans to men and women, and then discovered that it was the women who were really creating these broad-based changes. So now 98% of their loans go to women. They also changed, by the way, this is just an interesting sidebar. Women in Bangladesh had been brought up for centuries being told women can't handle money. And they really believed it. He said it would take some of them 10 years of getting a loan and repaying it before they developed self-confidence. And they always met in support circles with other women to help create their confidence. But once they started giving loans to women, the divorce rate went down. Because in Bangladesh, you could divorce your wife by just saying 3 times, "I divorce you." But once your wife had property and income, you weren't going to divorce her, right? So it was just one of those unintended consequences of actually creating more stability in marriages by giving women economic power. And there was a very beautiful story that he once told of woman who, they started giving these loans for $300. This is all it takes to build a house. And he was visiting this very small home that this woman had built with her loan. And she was showing him around. And then she took Dr. Eunice out to the goat shed. And she said, "This is where I used to live." And then she said, "I used to be a goat." Yeah. So this is what's possible when you really believe in people's potential. And he says here that poverty is not an accurate description of people. It's a label. It's a concept we put, saying some people deserve help. Some people have to be given things because they're not capable on their own. Now his approach, and this is where I'm going to end this, but his approach is that we need to just rip away these concepts that some people are more capable than others and enter into a relationship with them and support them in a way that they discover new potential. And it can take time and patience and love. But I do believe that's our work, of really helping people discover their own potential. And in this world, it's needed more than ever. So some of the statistics from Grameen Bank that are truly miraculous. They have worked with 60% of the poor. No, they've worked with 80% of the poor in Bangladesh. And of those 80% they've worked with, 60% are no longer in poverty. There is no development agency in the world that can boast that kind of success. And their bank, which is owned by the people they give money to, it's a cooperative, they have a 98% repayment rate. In this day and age, that is like unimaginable, 98% repayment rate. If you want to read the story, he has written several books, but the one that I really love is called Creating a World Without Poverty. His whole premise is that we really need to envision a world in which poverty will only be in museums. And children will walk by these dioramas of people living in poverty and say, how could that ever have been true? So he has this beautiful, noble vision for how we could live together. And it's all based on discovering the potential of people, especially those who've been discarded and disregarded. So we're going to move into our conversational time, but I do want to sit with this question. What are the bundles of potential in your community that exist out there behind the stereotypes and judgments and labels? And where have you seen this? You know, where have you seen this, been surprised by somebody, by their potential, by them suddenly showing you something about themselves that you didn't ever believe was there? You had no idea they could do this. You had no idea they were interested in this.